Welcome back to the deep dive, everyone. Go ahead and grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, because today we are taking a massive trip back in time. We're looking at the big picture of the old world today.
We really are. And it's a strange picture when you start looking closely at the details.
It totally is. So I want you, listening right now, to just try a little thought experiment with us. Picture a photograph of a 16th century cathedral somewhere in Europe. Got it. Okay, now hold that image in your mind and then pull up a mental picture of a grand government building in South America, and then maybe an imposing ancient post office in Asia.
Right, vastly different locations.
Exactly, different continents, supposedly completely different cultures and religions. But do you notice anything eerie? Have you ever looked at these grand ancient structures from all over the world and felt this, this undeniable sense of familiarity?
Yeah, it's a familiarity that goes way deeper than just thinking, wow, that's a pretty building. It's a very specific, almost unsettling feeling.
Yes. Unsettling is the perfect word.
Because it goes beyond aesthetics, When you really look closely, you start to realize you aren't just looking at similar decorative choices, you're actually looking at identical structural DNA.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that is our exact mission for this deep dive. We've got a seriously fascinating stack of sources today. We're pulling from mainstream architectural histories, some incredibly dense acoustic physics papers, and we're also diving into a collection of highly provocative alternative history essays.
Right, the one centering around what's called the Tartaria hypothesis.
Exactly. And our goal today is to look at what all these sources say and figure out if the identical columns, arches, and domes found all over the world are just like a coincidence of stylistic trends, or if we are actually looking at the surviving handwriting of a single ancient global civilization.
And to even begin to recognize that handwriting, we first really need to understand the vocabulary that they were using. We have to look at the grammar of stone, essentially.
The grammar of stone. I love that phrasing.
Because in the old world, these shapes, the column, the arch, the dome, they weren't just functional necessities.
Right, they weren't just there to keep the roof from caving in.
Exactly. They constituted a highly sophisticated, universally applied architectural language.
And I want to break down exactly how that language works, because when you or I look at a column today, we usually just think about the sheer engineering of it, right? We think, okay, that thick pillar is holding up a massive amount of weight.
Sure, that's the modern, purely functional mindset.
Yeah, but our architectural sources point out that in this ancient language, a column actually does so much more visually and psychologically.
It does. A column provides a building with rhythm. Think about walking past a massive colonnade. The evenly spaced pillars, they create a visual tempo.
It's almost like a metronome for your eyes as you walk by.
That's a great way to put it. It establishes an absolute order, and it quite literally dictates how you experience the space. It draws your eye down a hallway or across a huge facade in a very intentional, directed way.
Right, and then you move from the column to the arch, which, structurally is just mind-blowing when you really stop and think about it.
It is one of those profound innovations in structural engineering, hands down.
Because the sources talk about how an arch isn't just a curved doorway. From a physics standpoint, it's this brilliant way of taking immense, crushing downward gravity and distributing it outward along a curve.
Exactly. It takes rigid, heavy, completely unyielding blocks of masonry, and by locking them together with a central keystone, it literally uses gravity against itself.
That is so wild.
But visually, as a piece of architectural grammar, it does something else entirely. It makes that heavy stone feel like a flowing, continuous space.
Yeah, it turns a static, boxy room into this fluid wave of corridor.
Precisely. And then crowning it all, you have the dome.
Ah, the dome, which isn't just a fancy roof, right?
Not at all. The architectural texts we reviewed describe the dome as the actual heart of the building.
Think about the last time you stood under a massive dome. What actually happens to you? Physically, your gaze is immediately pulled upward.
Your posture changes.
Yeah. And acoustically, the sound in the room changes. It echoes. It resonates. Emotionally, you just feel elevated. It is this incredibly powerful psychological tool built entirely out of stacked rocks.
And what's fascinating here is that the mysterious civilization, often referred to in these alternative historical essays as Tartaria, well, they are theorized to have mastered this exact vocabulary globally.
Globally, that's the crazy part.
Right. According to the texts exploring this hypothesis, these shapes acted as a universally understood language that completely transcended local dialects or regional borders.
So whether you're in the East or the West, The underlying grammar remained a constant.
The physics and the proportion of the dome, the column, and the arch were an absolute constant everywhere.
I love trying to visualize this. It's almost as if the ancient world was all running on the exact same open source architectural operating system.
An operating system, yeah, that's a very modern way to frame it.
Like, sure, maybe one region puts a slightly different user interface on the building. Maybe they carve some local lotus flowers into the stone in India, right?
Right, or they use a different colored marble in Italy.
Exactly. But the core code, the operating system beneath it all, is identical.
That is a brilliant analogy. The interface changes, but the kernel remains the same. And we take that analogy just a bit further. If the columns, arches, and domes represent the skeleton or the operating system of these buildings, we then have to ask a really important question.
Which is?
How did these buildings come alive? How did they, for lack of a better term, breathe?
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
And our sources point us directly to the windows.
The windows, yes. Now, here's where it gets really interesting for me. And honestly, where I have to admit, I got a little tripped up when I was reading through the stack.
It is a massive paradigm shift from how we view things today.
Totally. Because today we think of windows primarily as a way to, see outside, let in some sunshine, and keep the rain out. But the historical sources suggest that in the old world, light wasn't just sunshine that you casually interacted with.
No, light was something that had to be intentionally and mathematically invited into a space and then altered.
Right. They didn't just let light in, they transformed it.
Exactly. And this is where stained glass comes into play. Specifically, those massive rose windows you see in grand cathedrals worldwide.
They act as highly engineered filters, right?
Yes. Their entire purpose was to take ordinary, everyday, full-spectrum sunlight and transmute it into a very sacred, specific atmosphere inside the dome.
Okay, but this is where I really need to push back a little, because the alternative history sources detail this incredible intersection between ancient architecture and modern physics, and it sounds almost like sci-fi.
You're talking about the cymatics connection.
Yes. They claim the geometric patterns of these massive rose windows aren't just pretty, arbitrary flower designs. They say they perfectly match the visual shapes created by sound wave frequencies.
Which is a branch of science called cymatics.
Right, but wait, pause for a second. I get that a dome looks majestic, but are these sources seriously suggesting that ancient builders possessed the modern acoustic physics required to map a specific sound wave into a stained glass window?
That is what the theory proposes.
But how would they even do that without digital tools or modern computers?
It's a very fair point of skepticism. I mean, to understand the claim, we really have to explain how cymatics works. It's essentially where physics meets art.
Okay, walk me through it.
So imagine you take a metal plate and you cover it in a very fine layer of sand.
Okay.
Then you vibrate that plate with specific sound frequencies. Say, by running a violin bow along the edge of the plate.
Oh, right, the Ernst Chladni experiments from the 1700s.
Exactly. When you do that, the sand doesn't just bounce around randomly. The sound waves create areas of high and low pressure on the plate, and the sand instantly organizes itself.
It forms those stunningly complex, perfectly symmetrical geometric patterns.
Yes, and this isn't digital at all. It's a naturally occurring, observable, physical phenomenon.
Right. But the jump from sand dancing on a tiny metal plate to a massive multi-ton stone and glass window is huge.
It is a massive jump. But the sources proposing this theory argue that ancient builders were, above all else, master geometricians. They didn't need modern oscilloscopes.
They just understood the raw mathematics.
Exactly. They deeply understood the mathematics of proportion and resonance. The exact geometric mandalas that emerge in sand when vibrated at specific frequencies, what the texts call sacred sound geometry.
Are the exact same geometric blueprints carved into the stone tracery of these rose windows.
That's the argument, yes.
And the specific frequency that keeps coming up over and over in these texts is 528 hertz.
Yes, 528 hertz is heavily emphasized.
Now, I will say, modern scientific papers in our source stack do acknowledge that frequencies like 528 hertz can have observable physical effects.
There is actual science backing that up.
Yeah, there are studies exploring how certain acoustic frequencies can stimulate plant growth or affect cellular repair in vitro. But to connect that to architecture, what is the actual mechanism? Like, how does a stationary glass window do anything with a sound frequency?
So the theory laid out in the Tartaria essay suggests the window acts as a macroscopic visual tuning fork.
A visual tuning fork. Okay, explain that.
The idea is that geometry and frequency are essentially two sides of the same coin. If 528 hertz creates a specific geometric mandala in sand, then building a window in that exact geometry acts as a filter.
Oh, I see where this is going.
As the sun's electromagnetic energy, the light, passes through the specifically shaped and colored glass, the theory suggests that the light itself becomes structured by that geometry.
So it's flooding the interior space with the visual equivalent of that healing acoustic frequency.
Exactly. You are bathing the room in structured light.
I have to say, my mind is a little blown right now, even if I'm still, holding on to my skepticism. Because if what these alternative essays are proposing is true, it makes me want to ask a pretty wild question.
Go for it.
Does this mean that these epic cathedrals, grand mosques, and massive temples weren't initially just built as places of worship?
But that is the implication.
Like, were they theoretically designed as ancient, massive healing machines?
Yeah.
Were they built to literally organize life using fine-tuned sound in the domes and filtered light through the glass?
It is a profound possibility that the sources really invite us to consider. It suggests these structures weren't just built to shelter people from the elements, but to acoustically and visually tune the human condition.
They were gigantic, resonant instruments.
Huge instruments you could walk inside of.
Okay, so if we entertain the idea that these massive resonant healing machines existed, the next logical question is, where are they?
And the answer, according to the architectural timelines, is that they're quite literally everywhere.
Everywhere. And this is where our standard map of history gets seriously challenged. I want you, listening to this, to think about the oldest, grandest building in your own hometown, or maybe the nearest major city to you.
Does it have those towering columns? Does it have a dome?
Because they really are everywhere.
We really do need to take a quick global tour to appreciate the sheer scale of this anomaly. Because if you look at colonial-era photographs of Africa, you find these overly grand, intricate stone buildings with perfect arches that completely defy the standard accepted historical timeline of the region's development.
It just doesn't fit the narrative.
Not at all. And then you move over to Asia, and you see the exact same mathematically perfect domes and arches, simply draped in local motifs.
Right, and you go to Australia, which is supposedly a very recently colonized continent in the grand scheme of mainstream history.
Supposedly built up from scratch very quickly.
Yeah, but you find exact architectural matches from the 1800s that look like they belong in ancient Rome. And then you look at India and Turkey, and you find incredibly dense, breathtaking archways that share the exact same structural engineering math as buildings in Paris or London.
The math is universally identical.
But the biggest anomaly for me, the one that really just stops you in your tracks when reading these sources, is the Americas.
Yes, the Americas present a very difficult puzzle for mainstream historical narratives. Specifically, when we look at the sheer scale of the infrastructure.
Because the story we are all taught in school, right, is that European explorers crossed the ocean, they discovered a brand new world, and then basically had to build everything from absolutely nothing.
You were supposedly surviving in the raw wilderness.
Exactly. But when you look at early accounts in the architecture of places like South America, or specifically Mexico City, it tells a totally different story. It doesn't feel like a new world that was slowly built up from log cabins and dirt roads.
Not even close.
It feels like it is standing directly on the bones of a massive pre-existing empire.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the sheer scale of what was supposedly built in the Americas is staggering. We're talking about massive stone plazas, towering domes, highly organized grid-like urban layouts, and incredibly complex water management systems.
Which takes decades, if not centuries, to build even with modern tools.
Precisely. The alternative hypothesis strongly suggests that the New World didn't build a new civilization from the dirt up in a matter of decades. Instead, it appears they simply wore the skeleton of the old world.
The infrastructure, the layout, the massive stone foundations, they were already there.
Waiting to be claimed.
Okay, I have to admit, I'm naturally pretty skeptical of this, but I really want to tease out the logistics of this rebranding idea.
You'll do it.
Because the mainstream history books tell us these European explorers arrived, and somehow, while fighting wars, dealing with rampant disease, and establishing basic agriculture, they also acted as master masons who quarried and erected mathematically perfect stone megalopolises in record time.
That is the accepted timeline, yes.
So are the alternative sources literally arguing that a conquering army just moved into an existing abandoned or defeated city, changed the street signs, and claimed the existing ancient bones as their own handiwork? Like, how does a secret like that keep?
Well, the sources suggest it's less about a grand, smoke-filled room conspiracy and much more about the simple mechanics of conquest. The alternative texts argue that it is logistically far more plausible for a small conquering force to appropriate an empty or decimated city than to build one from scratch with primitive tools and a tiny colonial workforce.
Oh, I see. It's the path of least resistance.
Exactly. And history is written by the victors. If you claim the Grand Cathedral as your own construction within just a few generations, the new population simply accepts that narrative as fact.
Because they don't know any better.
Right. It's a compelling counter-narrative because it directly addresses the sheer physical impossibility of the mainstream construction timelines.
Okay, so what does this all mean? We have two wildly different stories here. And just to be totally clear to you listening, we aren't here to endorse one view over the other or tell you what you should believe. Our goal is just to impartially look at what the sources say and explore the friction between them.
And there is a lot of friction.
So let's clarify these two opposing views for a second.
Let's start with the mainstream historical view. Historians and architects argue that this global similarity is simply the result of massive cultural exchange.
Trade routes, that kind of thing.
Yes, trade routes, the expansion of empires, colonialism, and traveling Jesuit priests who spread these architectural blueprints from region to region over centuries. Furthermore, mainstream history chops these designs up into highly categorized labels to keep them distinct and trackable.
Right, the labels. They'll look at a building in one century and say, oh, because of the pointed arch, that's strictly Gothic. Or this one over here mimics Greece, so it's neoclassical.
That's Baroque, that's Renaissance, that's Romanesque.
Exactly. They categorize them to show a linear progression of style.
And the mainstream view uses those categories to create a linear timeline of human progress and stylistic evolution.
Okay, but then on the other side, you have the Tartaria hypothesis.
Right. And this view argues that what mainstream historians call cultural exchange or stylistic evolution might actually just be the fragmented remnants of a single, borderless world civilization that was already highly advanced.
A civilization that didn't have to slowly trade these blueprints across oceans because the knowledge already existed everywhere concurrently.
Precisely. In the alternative view, there was no slow, agonizing spread of architectural knowledge from a single epicenter in Europe. The knowledge was ubiquitous. The world was already connected by a shared universal understanding of structural engineering, resonance, and geometry.
This raises such an important question about how we look at the past, because if the alternative view holds even a fraction of weight, it means our entire historical timeline is artificially chopped up by the very labels we use to try and understand it.
This is perhaps the most crucial takeaway from all our sources today. It highlights the absolute danger of categorizing history too quickly. As humans, we love to put things in neat little boxes.
We really do. It makes things easier to digest.
It does. But the moment we rush to label a magnificent, mathematically perfect structure as merely Baroque or strictly Gothic, we might actually be blinding ourselves to a much grander, unified truth.
By focusing so intensely on the minor, superficial differences in the decorative trim, like the user interface.
Yes, exactly. We completely ignore the glaring fact that the underlying structural skeleton, the operating system, is identical worldwide. We miss the forest for the trees.
I think that's a brilliant warning. If we get too caught up in the textbook labels, we lose the mystery. And honestly, sitting with this mystery, looking at the anomalies, that's the fun part.
It really is. It forces you to ask better questions.
So let's bring this all together. What if we unpack today? We started with this idea that civilizations leave a handwriting, a signature, masterful way that they lift heavy domes into the sky.
A mathematically perfect way they distribute weight through arches.
And a highly theoretical, almost magical way they may have used sacred geometry and stained glass to filter light and sound.
And whether you subscribe to the mainstream timeline of cultural exchange or the alternative hypothesis of a forgotten global empire, the lesson is really the same.
Which is?
If we dismiss this globally shared architectural language as mere decorative style, we lose something profound. We lose the spirit and the underlying principles of what was undeniably a massive, interconnected ancient effort to build grandly.
An effort that seemed to inherently understand how to harmonize human life with stone, light, and proportion.
Exactly. It's a testament to human potential no matter who built it.
It's an incredible thought. And it perfectly sets up where we are going next, because looking at the source stack for our next deep dive, We are shifting gears from the what and the why to the how.
Oh, I am so excited for the next one.
Me too.
Yeah.
Our next deep dive is going to focus entirely on impossible engineering.
That is going to be a fascinating discussion, because once you accept that these grand, mathematically perfect buildings were everywhere, the logistical questions of how they got there become totally overwhelming.
Overwhelming is the exact word. We're going to look at the actual mechanisms, like how did people build massive, continent-spanning canal systems?
How do they erect thousands of miles of starfort walls?
And dig highly complex, perfectly ventilated underground tunnels and move giant, multi-ton megalithic stones, supposedly using nothing but horses, wooden carts, and hemp ropes.
The mystery totally shifts. It's no longer just a question of who built the old world, but how they possibly pulled it off with the primitive tools the mainstream timeline insists they had.
The mechanical and engineering reality of these physical structures often directly contradicts the technological timeline we've been given. We're going to have to look at the actual physics of moving a 100-ton stone.
I am very much looking forward to unpacking that. It's going to challenge a lot of assumptions.
Same here. It's going to be a wild ride. But before we wrap up today, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought to ponder on your own.
Something to mull over.
Yeah. We spent this time talking about the majestic skeleton of the old world. We've explored the theory that ancient, universally connected architecture might have been intentionally built using specific acoustic geometries and filtered light to actually elevate, tune, and heal the human spirit.
A built environment that was truly resonant, designed specifically for human thriving and psychological elevation.
Exactly. So if that was the baseline of the ancient world, what is our modern world doing to us?
That is a heavy question.
Think about the buildings you and I spend our lives in today. Isolated, mismatched, sterile boxes made of poured concrete, cheap drywall, and flat, unfiltered glass.
Very true.
If the old world was a carefully tuned symphony designed to heal and elevate, what is our modern architectural landscape of strip malls and office cubicles doing to our collective psyche today? Are we quite literally living our lives completely out of tune?
It's a haunting question, honestly. When you strip away the profound physics of the arch and the acoustic soul of the dome, and you replace it with the cold, cost-saving efficiency of the modern grid, you really have to wonder what else we stripped away from the human experience in the process.
You really do. It makes you look at a concrete office block in a whole new light. Or lack of light, I guess. Next time you walk into a grand old building, look past the pretty facade, look at the skeleton, look for the handwriting. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. We'll see you next time.